Welcome to the Steps Podcast, a space to enjoy empowering conversations on spiritual growth and healing. These conversations are based on the Steps course, a 12-step program designed to bring freedom from negative thought patterns and behaviors, equipping participants with tools to live a more joyful and hope-filled life. In this series, Lou chats individually with a few participants to hear their stories of journeying towards freedom. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, today I chat to Polly, who is our director of Steps, and I talk about her journey of doing Steps, not once, not twice, but every single year for the past 5 or 6 years. We talk about what character growth looks like, what it looks like to grow in grace and love for herself and other people. And we also talk about the very important struggle with battling a Diet Coke addiction. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Polly.
Hello.
We have been talking about, you were talking to me about your fear of failure for a long period of time in your life. Just tell me, let's kick off. Let's start talking a little bit about what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so I don't think I would ever have said growing up I had a fear of failure. It was not language that I ever would have used, but I could see it looking back how it outworked in my life. I was a perfectionist. I always did really well at things. I was always known to the one that would get things right. So I wouldn't get things wrong generally. I never failed anything, exams, that sort of thinking. But I think growing up in that environment, I became someone who said, well, I can't fail at things because if I do, everything will go to pot. Whether it be I be rejected or whether someone will look at me badly. And so I sort of grew up in an environment where I thought, oh, actually, I can't fail at things. And that then internalized in myself to think I've got to work super hard at everything I do to get it right. And so I would say I became a lawyer. So again, failing at things like that could lead to big consequences. And it was almost quite a positive attribute to have in that environment because of how much effort we would put into making sure we got everything perfect for our cases. But I would say probably it was, trying to think, early 30s, done a lot of life, and was starting to see how what I'd put in place to protect me wasn't working because I would overwork. I would check things over and over again so that it would be right. Always thinking I can't get this wrong. And it also was making me say no to things because I had that fear, well, if I'm going to make a mistake, I may as well not do it at all. So I found myself, as I was getting older, what was probably quite a good thing in my 20s, because it would make me look really conscientious, was actually stopping me from doing things that I actually really wanted to do. And so it was about 6 years ago, I was given an opportunity to do something that I absolutely loved, had such a passion for. And yet everything inside me was saying, well, you better not do it because you're not good enough to do this. You won't be the top doing it. So therefore don't do it at all. And it was then I realized that fear of failure was actually stopping me living in the way that I wanted to live.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because when it's something that people celebrate and your I guess your performance and the effort you put into things, it did lead to good results.
Yeah.
And then people see it and celebrate it. And it's really hard then because there's a shadow side, there's a dark side to it, which in cases like that, you were the one to pay the price for it.
Exactly.
I can totally see how doing that for a long period of time just gets exhausted. Did it impact your health at all?
I wouldn't have said it would have at the time, but it just took up so much bandwidth. It was more the mental bandwidth that it took up. And no one would have seen it. Like I had a great life. Things were going really well. Had I not identified it as actually, this is not great because it's causing me to really not do the things I want to do. I think I could have happily lived to sort of this normal life, but I was exhausted by it. Because I would overthink everything in not a healthy way.
Yeah. It reminds me of that picture that I'm sure I said before, when you've got the duck that's like or the swan on the water just gliding beautifully, but underneath they're paddling really fast. And it's that when it's something from the outside, everything looks fine, but on the inside,
Exactly.
struggling, that's really hard. And so how did change occur then? If you got to the point where you're like, okay, this is really affecting me, what happened then?
Yeah, so I was recommended to go on steps, and I'd known about steps actually for a couple of years. And it's funny because although I knew I was struggling with this, I never thought, oh, that's a program for people who are really struggling. They're at rock bottom. This isn't for me. And it wasn't because I didn't think I had this issue. I knew I had this issue by this point. It was, I'd almost resigned myself to, this is just me, and I can't change this. This is part of who I am. It defines me, and I'm just going to live with it. And so it got to the stage that I thought, okay, I'll give steps a try. Didn't quite know what to expect, I've got to admit. And I had never done anything that looked to that sort of self-introspection before. So I was really nervous about going into it. Again, I think it's that fear of failure. Would I fail at doing the course? And particularly those early weeks, I didn't have a language for it. I really struggled to reflect and to answer those questions because although I knew something was going on in me, I couldn't get the language out to explain it. And that then made me, oh my goodness, I really am failing at this. I can't do this either. So I should just stop. But it was in those early weeks when we'd meet in a group, and I was only with 2 or 3 other people. We had a really small group doing steps, and I would hear them reflect, and they weren't working on anything that I was working on. But suddenly what they said would literally spark a light bulb in me. I go, that's exactly how I'm feeling. That is exactly where I'm at in my life at the moment. And I would just jot away. And suddenly, by meeting these people and hearing what they're going through, I could go, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's how I'm reacting. That's how I feel after I do it. That I started having that awareness, that language to be able to explain exactly where I was. And even that was liberating because I'd never had that before. I was, 35 years old, and I had struggled to really explain how I felt about myself beforehand. And so it was almost like the first hurdle that I had to go across to sort of be vulnerable enough to go, I don't get this at all. And to sit there and saying, I haven't got the right answer here. But it's because I was still thinking in that old mentality that it had to be a right answer and not whatever I had was the right answer. And so I think that was my first hurdle of getting through the process. And I have to say, even by the time I got to the end of the first course, whilst I had such a better awareness, I couldn't necessarily see it outplay in my day-to-day life. I still didn't understand really what the tools and steps were. Those, everyone talks about, I had these tools. And I got to the end of the process going, no, I definitely have a greater awareness of God. And I definitely have a greater awareness of my issue. And I know that I'm not alone in this sort of circumstance in my life. But I didn't quite fully understand the process.
You know what? I had exactly the same experience the first time I did it. It didn't feel tangible.
Yeah.
The kind of results. And I was wanting like a clear, right, this is completely different now. And some things had tweaked and changed, but I felt different, but I could not explain. I even am struggling now to articulate what that is, other than, I guess, that how you described it was quite good, and the kind of being more aware of yourself, God, and the relationship there. But it's funny trying to describe it to someone, isn't it? But what I really heard from what you said was the power of being in a group. Because what I'm hearing you say from before is that you carried this very much on your own, and other people didn't necessarily know how kind of big this fear of failure was, or they didn't feel it to that extent. But being in a group, even if someone wasn't working on the same thing as you, it's that knowing other people are hearing what you said and you're hearing what they're saying and getting encouragement from them. That's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, it was beautiful. It's something I'd never experienced before. In such an environment that is so non-judgmental. So I left having no shame. It was only I could feel like grace on myself. I felt don't be so hard on yourself, Paul, because I wouldn't want them, the people I was around in the group with, don't want them to be hard on themselves after hearing how they're sharing. And so it was almost like the care and love I had for the others in the group, I was starting to experience that for myself. And to be kinder to myself because I wanted them to be kinder to themselves from what they were sharing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does make sense.
But I definitely, at the end of that, I took away from it, there is something here that is working because I feel closer to God. I feel more aware of who I am and who I'm called to be. I don't fully know how to get there yet. I definitely think I struggled around more healthier habits. That took a while to put in place. But also I'm quite a slow processor, so I did go back on the slow steps again to try and unpack it.
But did that feel frustrating to you that there weren't clear kind of different habits or clear changes at the end? Like, how did that feel?
No, I think I was so happy that I felt loved. I felt that my relationship with Jesus was in a much healthier place, that it felt real. I felt more open in sharing where I was. Everything just felt a bit more honest, a bit more real. And that for me actually felt hopeful. I think there was a real sense of, I can see something happening here. I can't see it all, but there is definitely something good happening going through this process. And I want more of it. So I have to say, the first time I finished, I already knew I'd be doing it again. And I didn't quite know how that would look. But there was so much hope there. That
an important hope, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I think because I was like you, I wanted it to be done, dusted, tick the box, and get step 12, go, brilliant, don't have any fear of failure. This is great. I could just go on and do everything. And I have to say, I took bigger risks. I took bigger steps. And, looking back now, 6 years later, I can honestly sit here going, yeah, I sometimes feel that fear, but I don't let it control my yeses and my nos.
Yeah.
I take the risk. I'll fail. I don't feel the fear of failing in that respect because I know how to get up again. And I think it's not like the original fear will disappear completely, but it doesn't have a hold over me because I know when to say, look, I've done my best. And that's all that is required of me in that moment.
I think we can be really black and white, or at least I can be black and white. Sometimes I'm like, I'm healed, not healed. I have fear of failure or I don't have fear of failure. I think one thing that Steps really teaches and has taught me is that we're all on a journey, and it's not like you arrive at a destination and then you're sorted. Life happens. Like every day things are thrown at us. We have new obstacles and new challenges and opportunities. And I've really had to adjust my expectation of what kind of whatever I'm working on will look like. And yes, I can receive more freedom in an area, but actually the beauty of doing steps and 12-step groups is that we're all on a journey and it continues. It's not a journey that finishes and we're done. The beauty is in the meeting and the beauty in the session. And so I even started to feel like, well, actually, maybe I do want this to be more of a continual thing rather than I've done my course and I just go off by myself. What does it look like to be in community and to journey with this long term? And I know that you are really good at this. I know that we often have these kind of conversations. So why don't we just talk a little bit about what it looks like for you to keep growing and maintaining freedom?
Yeah, so for me, on a practical basis, I made the decision to do it at least once a year, to go into a process and to work on whatever I felt was probably more of a pressing need. And that has changed. So I have worked on my lack of self-care. I've worked on my need to comfort eat. And I'm at different stages of the journey in both of those sort of areas of my life. But I think first and foremost, when I said I'm going to do it every year, and I always then get to step 12 going, I really will miss not being in the structure. I found it really helpful for me to give that time one of the biggest issues with working on lack of self-care is I never gave myself any time. And so to go into this process and say, I'm going to do it for 12 weeks once a year was almost a real step of faith in that respect, because it's not something I never would have given myself time to do. So I think I've done it each year, but as I've done it, the tools that I'm learning, each of the steps, every time I've done it, I've learned something new about myself. I've learned something new about the process and how to use the tools. And it's drawing me closer to God. So each time I'm doing it, I'm becoming more open, more vulnerable in a way that is allowing God to work in and through me in the process. And then after the process finished, each time I'm able to use it in my daily life. So it has become a way of life for me. So if something crops up, whether it be on my lack of self-care or my comfort eating, I'm like, okay, let's go back. Where am I actually at? Am I at step one? Am I denying what's really going on, or am I recognizing it? Or is this actually trusting? Am I wanting to do this in my own strength, or am I trusting God to get into this situation? So take my comfort eating, for example, which is a big thing for me at the moment. And I'll go, I desperately want that fifth biscuit. And I say fifth because I probably had 4 and telling myself that, it's okay today just to have a few more. And I'm like, hang on a minute. Am I trying to do this in my own strength, or am I going to trust God to do it? And am I going to surrender to him? But also I've got to take responsibility. I'm choosing to go and get that fifth biscuit. And there's a difference between having the desire that it isn't great, that desire to want to keep on eating, whether it could be comfort, it could be joy. I eat for every single reason known under the sun. But it's more, okay, is that serenity practice? What can I control and give me the courage to make those healthier choices, but also recognizing in that moment, Lord, I can't control this desire. It feels really big. I just desperately want to go to that biscuit tin. So take that away, but help me to do what I can do, is to say no and go for the fruit. Just this time round, just this step. I don't have to think about tomorrow. Don't have to think about next week. But in this moment. And so these tools really have become, they're not just steps in a book now. They're adapting to my every moment. Yeah.
What really stands out about what you're saying, which I think is just beautiful, is that I was just really reminded, like, every time you choose to make that step of surrender or choose to not have that extra biscuit, that is doing so much for you spiritually and in terms of character growth. Like, if we think about patience, for example, we all want to become more patient. That in that moment is teaching you patience, and it teaches you self-control. And I have like similar things in my own life where I'm like, no, I'm choosing to say no to this urge because I know it'll help me in this moment, but it's also going to help me longer term. And one of the other reflections I had is that I've heard people say, oh, and you've mentioned it yourself, like, that you've kind of had this fear about it being very introspective, and, it could be seen, is this just navel gazing? But I guess if what I've observed in you, and I think I've observed it in myself as well, is that since you've been going through the steps process, we've been friends a long time, your capacity to love others and support others and be there for others and speak into others has grown so much, because you're more caring towards yourself, and you're more in tune with the Holy Spirit. And it feels like what he's done in you has just, like, there's been exponential growth in you externally.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing. I'm celebrating.
Oh, and I had to say, I celebrate too. I think it's one of those things I totally hear when people go, oh, you're just spending time talking about yourself. But actually, I've spent so many years thinking I can't talk about myself. It's not Christian to think about myself. I've just got to think about others the whole time. But I can't be any help to others until I can sort out my own mess and know how to hand over my mess to God. And so I think, the outworking of just spending that hour a week, it's an hour and a half a week for 12 weeks, has such ramifications on my relationships with others. And I just think, like, my relationship with my kids, Like, I am so much quicker now to apologize when I mess up. And I think before I would be like, oh no, I can't say that because they're going to look at me the wrong way or they're not going to respect what I do. And now I'm like, oh, kids, I really messed up there. I'm sorry. I'm going to try not to do that again. And I now start seeing it back that they're much quicker to go, oh yeah, that was me. Sorry. I'm really going to try not to. So it's opened up community and almost that vulnerability within friendships and relationships. It's just been wonderful to see. And I feel actually I'm more help to my friends because I don't feel I need to know the answers anymore. But I know a process that could help them in their own journey, and it will look different for them. So I feel so much more freer to just share where I'm at without feeling like I have to solve other people's problems and allow them to go on the same journey. And it will look different. I love our conversations that we have. And to be able to do this in community, say, oh, actually, this week I've really been struggling on this. And then you're like, oh, actually, I remember when I did this. And just talking about it, it takes the power and the shame out of some of those things that we struggle with. It's a beautiful process. It really is.
It's just funny, isn't it, how you can go working on one thing, but then the fruit of the process and the experience means that you get breakthrough in so many other areas that you didn't expect.
The ripple effects, and I always think it's the ripple effects. So I went working on fear of failure, and then the impact it had on some of my fears of rejection. And then I went working on lack of self-care, and then the impact that's had in terms of how I now treat my work, how I treat my physical body. It's some of it's so practical as well. So this last time around, I worked on lack of self-care, but very much more in terms of physical lack of self-care, because I've been working on my work and I put healthier boundaries in terms of my work. And I go to the gym now 3 times a week, which I haven't done for over 4 years. And I look back and I tried to get my head around this in my own strength. I've tried to do it, I can't. And there's this massive block. And then 12 weeks later, I suddenly look back and going, I've been going to the gym for 6 weeks now. Wow. Because it's just, I'm not saying I'm no different than I was before. I'm feeling actually a lot better. I have more energy. Nothing's particularly changed in other areas, but I'm like, wow, I feel better for doing this and for loving myself better than I did 3 months ago. And there's this thing, I think we both talked about this with James Clear, this habit, it takes 60 days. And I can so see that. And I love, because with that 60 days, that's like 2 months, that you're in that process for 3 months. And so by the time you get to looking at the habits, you've almost got those 60 days to start trying to practice it. I'll fall down. I mean, we all fall down. But to get up again and give it a go, that, like, for example, last year I gave up Diet Coke after going through the process. I was addicted to Diet Coke. And I haven't touched it for a year. It was coming up for a year next month.
Wow, you used to drink so much Diet Coke.
I was a minimum of like a 4 pot a day. Sometimes it'd be 2. And I've done that for 12 years since having kids. I'd had a Diet Coke every day. It was my caffeine fix. And I tried to give it up and I couldn't before. But just, it might seem little to somebody, but for me, that was really big because it felt like it was a hold over me. I couldn't get through the day without that Diet Coke at 3 o'clock. And using the tools, I now wouldn't even think about it. I've got it in the fridge. I now could have it in the fridge for other people. And it would never even occur to me to have that Diet Coke. I'm not saying Diet Coke's bad, but the way I was using it was, and sorry, Coca-Cola. The way I was using it was really unhealthy for me because I was using it as a crutch. And so I didn't want to do that. So yeah, I just think it's wonderful to look back. And I think at the beginning, if I'd been able to see where I am now to where I was 6 years ago, I'd be like, oh, I wish I'd done it 2 years earlier. Because then I wonder where I'll be in 2 years' time, But like you, I just love being, it's a journey that I love doing because I'm doing it with Jesus. I'm not alone. And so whatever crops up, it brings up all the other stuff. I mean, there will always be stuff. We're always working on stuff. I probably need to work on my pride. Definitely need to work on my greed sometimes. But I love the fact I can say that without shame. Like, we all work on stuff. I think
we all have,
be open. It's so liberating. It's so freeing. And yeah.
What encouragement would you give to anyone listening I mean, you've been so encouraging already, but if you've got anything else that you would just add in as a final thought.
I would say, if there is anything, I mean, there is always something. We can't always identify it. Some people can identify it more than others. I struggled to identify it for years. I think if there's anything that people want to work on, if they just want to grow in intimacy with God, like if they don't know what it looks like, they couldn't put a name to what they're doing, but they just like, actually, I want to become more like Jesus, and I want a way to do that. Then I say, just give yourself 12 weeks. Just start. You can always quit. That's the thing. If it's not for you, you can always quit. But the tools that I've learned from going through the process, they impact every area of my life. They impact my conversations. They impact how I think. It is honestly the most liberating thing I've done. And I would be a completely different person if I hadn't gone through it 6 years ago and continue to go through it every year. So I just give it a go. Be open to what the process could do, and don't expect to get it all straight away. I still haven't got it all. Every time I do the steps, I learn something new. This time around, it was step 6 and 7, where we try and change our behavior. And that to me was just mind-boggling, like a new experience for me. And I've been doing steps for 6 years. So I was like, wow, I've seen it in a whole new light. Now I can apply this again. So I'm learning stuff all the time. These are fluid. It's a fluid process that God works in and through these steps. And I just get excited now to do it. So yeah, give it a go. If you've done it before, try it again. Work on the same thing, work on different things, just allow yourself that hour and give yourself grace. I think a lot of times, particularly in the early years, going through the steps, I thought I had to give like so many hours to this each week. I need to really work on it. And what I've now realized, I come as I am. So wherever I am at in that season, I give what I can give, and that's okay. And I think I've actually sometimes got more out of it by just being honest. Like, I can give this half hour a week and then I give it the group reflection time. That's okay. I can take one question and reflect on it for the whole week, and that's it. All I'm going to do, just reflect in my own time when I'm driving. And actually that's been enough. I didn't have to sit and write everything out each time. And other times I do. Sometimes I've got the capacity to do that. So I think definitely give yourself grace, because the process definitely will teach you grace.
Polly, thank you so much. It's been so good to talk to you. What I loved about this conversation was just listening to the journey that Polly has been on in terms of growing in love for herself, love for God, and love for people. And we just talk about how character is shaped so much through the steps process. And one thing that really stood out to me was that you can work on one thing in steps, but the ramifications can just be so significant in terms of how it can help us in other areas of life. And it was hugely encouraging to me. I hope that it encourages you as well.
The Steps podcast is brought to you by Steps Global, a non-profit charity that is funded by a group of Steps supporters. These are people who have experienced personal transformation through the steps and who want to share these tools more broadly so that anyone can find freedom from unhelpful thought and behaviour patterns. To join us or share a one-time gift, visit www.stepscourse.org/support. If you are interested in finding out more about the Steps course, including upcoming courses, sign up to our mailing list via our website. Thanks for listening.